Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It's Casey, and I look a little bit different today than I did last time you saw me because I went to Ash's house yesterday and he cut my hair, which was long overdue, let me tell you that. And why he was cutting my hair, he was cutting my hair for a while. He hasn't exactly missed his calling, but he did a good enough job. But why he was cutting my hair, we had a very long discussion about the UN General Assembly, which is something that I never ever do, ever. I don't talk about politics in public because, as you all know, if you've watched my channel before, I was raised under socialism and mama didn't raise no fool. There was a very popular proverb when I was growing up. Applause at dawn, swings in the gallows at dusk. And the general translation of that is that you should never ever speak about politics in public because the correct opinion changes by the hour. And so what saw you celebrated on the right side of history in the morning can see you in deep, deep trouble come night. And the reality is, anything to do with that, it is always better to plead ignorance than to try to plead defense. However, in saying that, you can probably guess from the title of this video that I have some concerns, and you'd be correct. I have serious, serious concerns. As an outsider looking in, and I've been here for going on 11 years now, I'm very, very close to surpassing that 11-year mark. So, I've had a good amount of time here to notice some things. And one of the very first things I noticed on my first day about your societies and about your culture is that there is a deep, deep disconnect between modern Western life and reality. A lot of people, and I'm saying this with as much love and as little judgment as humanly possible, but a lot of people, if not most people, in the modern West severely lack basic survival skills. If the grid was to fail tomorrow and you lost access to the internet and running water and electricity, I wholeheartedly, with every inch of my being, believe that a terrifying amount of people, a majority of people even, would fail to make it to the 48-hour mark. And that is not a hyperbole. Like I said, that was one of the very first things that I noticed upon arriving here. And that was a very hectic day, the day that I arrived here. And it's still something that I noticed. It stuck out like a sore thumb. And at this point, it's not even a flaw of the system, right? It is basically a defining characteristic of your cultures. And it's getting to a point where it's becoming very, very dangerous. Because, and again, I say this with all the love in the world, you are ignorant to your own ignorance. And that has left you dangerously blind to the bear that you keep repeatedly poking with a stick for fun. When I first arrived here, I was stunned by how obviously unprepared you all are, to the point it actually felt surreal. Like, how can a people who lived in the shadows of World War II be so fragile? How is there such a huge disconnect? It's not like you're centuries removed from war. You're barely 80 years past it. There are still people alive today who lived through it. And yet, if you were to hand the average person in 2025 a can of lighter fluid and a box of matches, they would still somehow fail to light a fire. The reality is, none of you are even remotely prepared for war. Not your civilians, not your cities, hell, not even your militaries for the most part are prepared for war. Like, sure, you might be able to, stick it up for a simple border conflict or a limited engagement, but to be honest, I think a lot of Western countries would even struggle to operate in that capacity. Countries like France and the UK, their militaries are so depleted, I think even a simple border conflict at this point would be largely beyond their capacity. And then you get to a total war, and you can forget it. There is no way, no how any of you are coming out unscathed from a total war. And unfortunately, I think, for the most part in Western culture, the only wars that you are going to break out into are total wars. But then, because it was so weird and so surreal to me, I started digging into it a little bit, and the puzzle pieces started falling into place. Basically, after World War II, the United States rolled out the Marshall Plan, which was a massive international reconstruction project that wasn't just about rebuilding, it was also about cultural erasure of trauma. Under the Marshall Plan, growth replaced grief, comfort replaced memory, and instead of learning the very hard lessons from war, Western countries instead were encouraged, in fact, kind of forced, to chase after stability, progress, and ease. In 1941, Detroit managed to flip from making cars to building tanks in under a year's time, but today, in 2025, we live in a just-in-time global economy where everything is lean and outsourced. Semiconductors come from Taiwan and rare earth minerals from China, and your fuel comes from shipping routes halfway across the world that can be disrupted at any point in time by anybody in between your country and the country of its origin. You can't prevent that. The old arsenal of democracy, it is gone. It has left the building. You no longer have idle steel mills waiting in the wings for conversion if you need them. No, now you have automated plants that are designed specifically for razor-thin margins and quarterly earnings. So if war comes to your doorstep and you do not have factories that can be flipped for conversion, then you're going to break. And even if factories aren't your thing and you could care less about that, we can instead focus on your houses because your homes are no better than the factories themselves. I mean, the average house in 2025 has maybe, at most, 3 to 5 days of food in the house at any given point in time. And then your car fuel tanks are empty, or at least near empty the majority of the time, and you have no backup generators, and you have no knowledge whatsoever of how to purify water in an emergency. Compare that with 1942, in which every single family had a rations book and scarcity was expected. Even without a war, scarcity was expected, and they were just expected to endure it in a way that I don't think people in 2025, even in an emergency, could tolerate. You have Amazon and you have Uber Eats and you have Tap to Pay. That is your baseline living standard now. And it's going to be very, very difficult for most of you to adjust to living without that in any capacity. So what happens when you find yourself in a total war situation and all the electricity has been diverted to different sources and your fridge stops humming and the water starts running brown and you have no idea what to do with it or how to drink it so it's soluble? And what are you going to do? What are you going to do? That's when the panic is going to start setting in. Not when the bombs start dropping, but from the realization that no help is coming. You are on your own. And despite what you might think listening to this video right now in your little house with your electricity and your running water, the vast majority of you, easily 90, I would go even 95% of you, are not prepared to do that. I would wager quite a bit of money that the vast majority of you could not survive a single week without digital infrastructure. And that's not because you're weak. I'm not blaming you in any way, shape, or form because it's not your fault. It is a result of the society that has raised you, the system that you have grown up under that has failed systematically to teach you any basic survival skills. Most of you live in dense cities. That means that you are completely and totally dependent on just-in-time food systems and electric pumps and central heating. Divert electricity from a couple of substations or cut a couple of undersea cables and your entire life, your entire existence grinds to a screeching halt within minutes. And I just want to point out as well why we're here, just so I can make it abundantly clear. This is not a pro-purpose video. For the most part, the preppers that I've seen in the West are complete and total idiots. Like, what are you going to do with 60 boxes of Lay's barbecue chips and 6 million rounds of ammo? You're going to die of malnutrition. That's what you're going to do. Like, I look at them and they show off their water supplies and I'm supposed to be impressed that they've got 2 pallets of water. Like, I am not convinced that they are educated on how much water a human body requires on a day-to-day basis because they're going to run out of soluble water in like 3 months after the war starts. Like, and then what are they going to do? Because they've scared off every other community within a 100-mile radius because they were terrified that they were going to, still rob them of their lifetime supply of Lay's barbecue potato chips. And so they threatened them with their ammo and now they're all alone. So when they realize that their spine is curving over from scurvy because they didn't have the foresight to plant an orange tree on their commune somewhere. And so they have no vitamins coming in because Lay's potato chips are not that great in vitamin deficiency. Yeah. So they're just going to, wither away like that guy in Into the Wild. What was his name? I think his name was Christopher Candless because I remember it because I remember thinking that it was a very ironic last name for someone in that situation, Candless. So yeah, don't listen to them. They're all idiots with no idea what they're speaking about and they just have an apocalyptic fetish. They have no actual real life skills. I think the situation in Ukraine and Gaza have really done something to people's perception on war because they see the drone footage, they see the ruined buildings, they see the tragic headlines, and that leads them to think that they understand war. But those two, they're border conflicts. They're terrible and tragic, yes, but they're not wars. The wider system within them still functions perfectly fine. They still have supply chains. They still have alliances. They still have rules. They are not wars. They are not Dresden. They are not Stalingrad. They are not Nagasaki. They are not everyone everywhere all at once at every single hour. But that's not even relevant. That is not the big picture. The big picture here is that the part that no one wants to talk about is that it's not the government. It's not the supply chains. It is you, the society, the people. You don't understand it. Because I hear it all the time in conversation, especially around drafting, which is admittedly probably the most prominent conversation that we have about war in Western society. But every time someone talks about it, they always go on about, if I got drafted, I would just say no. And I want to burst out laughing every single time I hear that, because that's not how this works. You don't just get to say no. You don't have the right to refuse. That right has gone out the door as soon as the drafts start pouring in. Once you're under military law, you don't have the luxury of saying no. You don't have the luxury of choice. The luxury of choice has left the building. It has flown out the window. It is on its way to a different continent right here and right now, because military law trumps civil rights. The system isn't built around individual will, it is built around obedience under threat of force. You are not going to prison. They do not have the resources to put you in prison. In fact, you are the resource. In wartime, refusal is not a passive act. It is disobedience. It is desertion. It is cowardice. And all three of those things are wartime crimes. And the punishment for those crimes are not gentle. Best case scenario, you're going to end up in the penal unit. Worst case scenario, they're just going to you, which actually, thinking about it, they're both worst case scenarios. They're exactly the same thing. The penal unit, I prefer to call it the cannon fodder unit. It's just, in the penal unit, you die a slow death and you die a quick death. And unfortunately, you don't actually get to pick that. They will pick that for you, because I don't know if you know what a penal unit is, but I wouldn't want to be in one under any circumstance. The first war that I was under, because in that war, it was more of a situation. The penal unit had a 5% survival rate. It was really, really bad. It basically became your job to do things that no one else wanted to do, that no one else would dare to do, such as, clear out landmines and dig under shell fire. It was basically just a death sentence wearing a uniform. And that's what I think people don't realize. The true horror of war is not so much the enemy, it's more the knowledge that your side can and will kill you if you do not toe the line. And I think if we're to be completely blunt and honest here, that delusional idea that objecting is something that you will have the capability of doing comes from the lens of a limited peacetime draft, like what Israel has, where conscientious objectors go to prison for 6 to 9 months and then they go home and it's wiped from their record like nothing ever happened. But that only works in that specific way because Israel is not in a state of complete and total mobilization. It is in a state of conflict, yes, but its entire society is not having to rewire itself around survival. In a limited war, such as Korea and Vietnam and the wars of the 60s and 70s, governments can and will tolerate a certain level of dissent so that they can keep up the appearance of democracy and human rights. But that completely disappears in a total war situation. In a total war situation, every calorie, every bullet, every uniform has to serve the survival of the state. You're either useful or you're eliminated. There is no in-between. And I've actually got a story that perfectly encapsulates this. Well, it's not so much a story, it's a bunch of stories that have kind of been Frankenstein together into one little vinaigrette. But the first war that I was involved in, the way things worked is that you had the front line, you had the middle line, you had the back line, and then you had the camp. And I always stayed at the camp because my mother was a head physician. I never went on the actual lines. It wasn't my job to do that. I was very young. My job was to stay at camp. And that's what I did. But the troops, they would rotate on a weekly basis between the different lines until they got a week at camp, and then they would go back to the front line and rinse and repeat. And that's just how things functioned. And at camp, we had this old musty barn that somebody along the way had repurposed into a makeshift pub. And it was gross in there. It was disgusting. It always smelled like mold spores and rotten hay and animal feces and vomit and sweat and just yeast from the beer. It was a very specific and very potent perfume. And out the front of this barn turned pub, there was a flagpole. And what the troops would do is that they would drag any deserter, any coward in the face of the enemy, that's what it was called, like technically speaking, like technical term was coward in the face of the enemy. They would drag any deserters back to the camp and they would tie them to this flagpole in the most uncomfortable position that you could possibly imagine. And they would leave them tied up to this flagpole for 24 hours. And everybody at camp, and there was a lot of people at camp, it was something like 4,000, 5,000 people. Like, it was a lot of people. It might have even been 6,000 people. Like, there were a lot of bodies at the camp, but every single person there knew what being tied up to that flagpole meant. But that wasn't even the end of it, because, you know, the cowards in the face of the enemy, they need to be punished more severely than that. So what would happen over the 24 hours that they are tied up to this flagpole is that everybody at camp, mainly the troops, but anyone could do it, there was no limitations on doing it, is that they would start pelting this person who was tied up to the flagpole with fruit and vegetables and eggs and cow shite. And the troops specifically had a thing that they did, which was completely and totally disgusting, which is they would take a bucket over the course of the day and they would all shit and piss into it. And then once it was filled sufficiently, they would take the bucket and they would tip it over the person tied to the flagpole. But again, even that is not the worst of it. No, the very, very worst of it is that the person who had tied them up to the flagpole initially, and this was done every single time without failure, is they would take the blood of one of the fallen and they would smear it on their face. And then, after all that was done, after 24 hours, the person who's tied up to the flagpole would get the opportunity. They could either go back to the front line or they could stay tied up to the flagpole until they succumb to the elements or the birds, or most often dehydration, I guess, technically. Like I said, if you're not useful, then you're expendable, and that is the ugly truth of war. But the person, if they decided that they were going to go back to the front line, they were not allowed to bathe until they had gone through a full rotation and made it back to the camp. Only then were they allowed to bathe all this shit, all this literal human feces that has been smeared and covered all over them. Only then were they allowed to wash it off. There was a saying, and they said it all the time, is that a coward isn't even worth a wasted bullet. And I think right there, more than anything, captures the ugly logic of war. In a total war, refusing isn't just a cute little cell with an eventual release date. It is a cliff. You either get shot, or you're worked to death, or you're put on the line in the most expendable way possible. That's why so many soldiers in the past described feeling trapped, not just by the enemy, but by their own side, because there is literally no way out. The last total war that you had ended 80 years ago, which is about 2.5 great-grandparents ago, which in terms of civilization time is a blink of an eye, but in terms of memory time, it's basically completely and totally gone. The people who could confidently tell you what a bomber sounds like before the roof of your house caves in are basically all dead. There's very few of them left, and their children just remember a father who used to flinch too hard at fireworks and ate dinner in silence, and their grandchildren might remember a grandfather who used to fold anxious little animals out of napkins at family parties, and their great-grandchildren, which would be, for the most part, you remember nothing about this. You spend all day posting about fascism from a phone that has more computing power than the Apollo missions, and you buy strawberries in July because you have supermarkets that can keep them fresh all year round, and you have drive-through workers who will hand you a double bacon cheeseburger at midnight, and then you will come home and you will still sit there and you will complain and compare the society to hell just because the fries weren't salted. And let me just say, I have so much fun here. To me, the modern West is basically just one big, never-ending spa day. It might not be the most, colorful or exciting of adventures, but boy, is it relaxing. Like, I am relaxed 24/7. I work like 60 to 80 hours a week in an average week, and I get to leave at the end of my shift, and I get to come home, and I don't even have to cook for myself if I don't want to. I can literally stop somewhere along my drive home and just someone else will cook my food for me, and I just pick it up and I bring it home and I eat it. And if I'm too lazy to even do that, I don't have to. I can order something and someone will deliver it to my door. And it's like they're a serf and I'm the emperor, and they have to bow down at my feet because I pay them $2. It is insane. It is actually mentally unhinged. But I love it. I love the fact that I can get this fat. Like, I held off on getting fat for a very, very long time. For a good 3 to 4 years that I was here, I really resisted getting fat. But now, being fat is my favorite thing in the world. I could leave my house right now and go get a large pizza, come back here and sit here and eat it. And there's nothing that anyone can say or do about it. It is chef's kiss. And then I also, like, once I can sit on my couch eating my pizza, and I have got the entirety of the Library of Alexandria at my fingertips. I could go online and I can find whatever book I want, whatever movie I want, whatever song I want, whatever video game, if I want to play a video game, whatever I want, I can watch it right here, right now, with no restrictions. There's nothing stopping me from doing so. I can go on Amazon.com right this second, and if I want to, I can find a life-size cardboard cutout of Nicolas Cage, and I can buy it, and it will be delivered in 3 days. I can leave my house at any point of the day that I want, with my hair a mess, with no bra on, wearing pajama-adjacent clothing, and no one's gonna write me up as an antisocial miscreant. Like, you have no idea how good life is here. It is so good. And I know that, so many of my videos are just me complaining, but if you actually listen to what I'm saying in them, I'm rarely complaining about the actual experience of being here, because the experience of being here is freaking lovely. I mean, like I said, it's not the most exciting of experiences. It's actually pretty mundane in the grand scheme of life, but it is lovely. It's just, the people annoy me. You're annoying. And I know it's not your fault, okay? I'm not blaming you. I know that comfort magnifies hardship. And when you've grown up knowing nothing but fast internet and Netflix and air conditioning, then, high fuel prices does feel like oppression. I'm not dismissing this in any way, shape, or form. My God, it is getting increasingly difficult to block it out, because now you're getting to a point that you're whining about stupid things that you know absolutely nothing about. Like, what do you know about fascism? You know nothing about fascism, and yet I hear the word from your mouths constantly. You wouldn't know fascism, it hit you in the face. I heard somebody, I don't remember what it was specifically, but I heard somebody the other day compare something that was happening in their lives to Poland 1945. Like, oh my God, shut up. Do you not hear yourself speak? Are you not embarrassed? Do you not have any concept of how petulant you sound when you say stuff like that? It's like you're a generation of nepo babies. You just have never suffered a day in your life, and yet you just continuously go on and on and on about how much harder you've had it and how much you've suffered compared to everyone else in the history of the world. It is insufferable. Actually having the audacity to claim that you work harder than anyone else, any other generation in the history of the world, while actively complaining about the 38-hour work week, is pathetic. It is actually pathetic. Like, can I just ask, and I need to know, what do you think happens under a socialist system? And the reason that I'm asking that is that it's another word that gets thrown around willy-nilly, nonstop, often, most often, very loudly and very venomously, by the exact same people who are complaining about a 38-hour work week. Like, are you under the impression that under a socialist system, people just don't work? Because if you are, I have some very bad news for you. I worked 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, from the age of 10. It never stopped. I literally lived at work. I was born at work. And I mean that, again, in the most literal sense of the word, in that my mother's clinic was on the bottom floor of our house, and then it was like a duplex style, and our living house was at the top. We never left work. We were at work all the time, which leads me directly into the next flaw that I've observed over the years, which is there is a large minority, a very shockingly large minority, who desperately want to see a train wreck, whether it be a school, whether it be a different kind of crime. They scream very vocally, release the footage, release the manifesto, release the files. Like, why? What benefit does that possibly have to you? Why do you need to see that? What is it in it for you? And the reality is, the answer to that is that there's nothing in it for you. You're just bored in your own life and you're desperately seeking to satisfy your curiosity. But the point that I'm trying to make is that I make a very conscious decision not to consume those kind of videos. And it's not because I find them mentally disturbing. No, it's actually quite the opposite problem that I have. I legitimately think, and this is very, very shameful in every way, shape, and form, but I legitimately think that I could be eating a hot dog in the subway and somebody directly in front of me could deliberately slip intentionally in a fatal manner, and I would just continue eating my hot dog like nothing had happened, if anything. And again, very shameful. Shameful but honest, I would probably get a little bit annoyed that my train would be delayed. And then when my train came, I would get on my train and I would go home and I would walk through my door and I would never ever think about it again. It is an objectively horrific thing to witness, and yet I would never ever think about it ever again. And that's not a PTSD thing. In my specific case, it's just because I have witnessed so many horrific things already in my life that it just wouldn't leave the impression that it should. And it is not normal to have that kind of reaction to that situation. And if I'm to be completely honest here, which I'm trying to be, is the one thing about myself that I truly, truly dislike, and is the reason why I actively make the decision that I make not to consume those sort of videos. Because it's not normal. And yet, out in your societies, out in your cities, out in your towns, there is a disturbingly large minority of people who would quite literally cut off their own finger to have unfettered access to crime scene videos and crime scene photos. And that is not mentally healthy. The reason that serial killers escalate so rapidly in their crimes is that the neural pathways in your brain that are stimulated when you watch violent videos are the exact same ones that are stimulated when you watch a different kind of video of the breeding variety. Fear and arousal have the exact same hormonal response within the body. They are inseparable from one another. And so when you spend too much time consuming these sort of videos, you start to get a sick thrill from them. You may not mean to, but it is unfortunately biologically, physically inevitable. But then you also have the flip side of the problem, which is equally ludicrous, which is when you have lived in such a sanitized environment that you view any and all forms of violence as equally brutal. There are some people who genuinely do believe that war is drone footage on the news, or an argument on Twitter, or a draft that they could, bounce from and instead choose to do a 9-month stint in prison. They don't fully comprehend the true brutality of a total war and the absolute chaos and havoc that it wreaks on the lives of every single person that it has in its reach. And I think that's just the coldest, hardest truth of history, is that people don't learn lessons until they are literally smashed into their bones. Like, I can sit here and tell you over and over and over again what war and famine and collapse and authoritarianism looks like, but if all you've ever known is Uber Eats and Afterpay, it's not going to settle for you. It's not going to sink into your bones, because to you, it's just a story. It's so far removed from your own reality that you don't have the conceptual skills to visualize exactly what I'm telling you. You have movies, you have books, but they're not reality. They are not reflective of the actual situation. And so to you, it's always going to be a story until it's not a story, at which point it's too late. So anyway, that sounds like a good closing statement. And so I am finished my little rant for the night. And as always, this is Casey signing off. Stay weird out there, stay safe, and maybe consider taking some first aid lessons, or don't. I don't care, really. I'm not your mother. Good night.